Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call this meeting to order, the Mayor and Board of Commissioners for December the 14th, 2021. Will you rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can I get the roll call, please?
Commissioner Braun? Here. Commissioner Shepard? Commissioner Pearson?
Here.
Commissioner Warning?
Here.
Let the record show you do have a quorum.
Thank you. Tonight, I would like to have a moment of silence for a local Amish family that recently lost their child in a tragic accident in Calvert. I know on behalf of our board and our staff, we send them our prayers and our thoughts. To lose a child during the holidays, I couldn't imagine what they are going through. So if we could have a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you. All right. The only thing on our business meeting items is that we actually have a December 28th town meeting. Now, in prior years, we have canceled that meeting and started off in January with a new meeting. So we need to get the board's pleasure on the meeting on the 28th.
Do we have anything pressing that we need to discuss?
No.
I make a motion, we cancel the December 12th, or 28th, 12th too,
The 12th, too? Okay.
meeting.
We can do that.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, citizens' input tonight. Would anyone like to speak this evening? Anyone? All right. Moving into staff reports. Town administrator.
All right, I have a couple items I'd like to bring to your attention and go over with you and give you an update on. With the success of Winterfest and Spooktacular, we're getting a lot of different entities that have gotten involved and they want to continue to get involved. And some of you might remember a couple of years ago, I think it was 2016, we created the Community Events Alliance. And I think that we should, it's in our ordinance, and I think that we should get that committee up and running in January again. It's not really anything that you have to make appointments for because the town personnel are pretty much already appointed to it by default. And other members of the committee are like representatives from the fire company, the Legion, the Lions Club, the Chamber. And the whole purpose of that is to get all the entities to be together at the beginning of the year to sort of talk about what they have planned. This came out of a couple different circumstances that we were presented with, but one of those was back in 2016 when the fire company and the town were inadvertently doing Halloween events at the same time. And, you know, obviously we like to work with them and they like to work with us, but if we could get on everybody's calendar at the beginning of the year, one, we can make sure that if an entity is doing a particular event and they want other entities to be engaged with them, it's a good way to talk about the resources that are available. I think it's especially important for us to be doing it from the standpoint of our businesses because our businesses are really getting engaged and seeing the benefits of having these community events. So after the first of the year, I'll be sending some letters out to those entities to try to set up a meeting. And these meetings are supposed to happen on a quarterly basis. And we ask that any entity that is planning on doing something reach out to us so we can put it on an agenda and have a meeting and make sure that, you know, one of the things I see happening the most is whether it's the middle school or anybody else, they want to close the road down. And the chief finds out about that in the 11th hour. And we're scrambling to get permission from State Highway. If we know about this well in advance, we can make sure that those portions of the events run more seamless. A couple other things I wanted to bring to your attention. There is a new doctor's office that's opened up on Ryan Drive. That's one that I wanted to bring to your attention. The other thing is, if you recall, a while back, I sent you the email about applying for the operators grants with MDE. We did get awarded that grant, and we received $34,640. And the reason why I like to bring that out is because I think it's very rewarding for all of us to realize that the only way you get that grant is if your wastewater treatment plant is operating above and beyond environmental standards. They don't give you the grant for just meeting what you're required to do. They give you the grant because you're operating at a level even higher, which means our discharge is more environmentally friendly than just the standard, what you're required to do by your discharge permit. So we've gotten that every year since the plant is open. So our wastewater treatment plant is doing its job above and beyond what it was designed to do. So that's a good thing. The other thing is that the Chester Water project is officially closed out in reference to USDA financing. That was all done last week. The beginning of last week is when we went to closing on that. So the interim financing we have will convert into 40-year financing, and I believe the interest rate on that is like 1.40%. So we got a really good. That's actually a better rate than we have with the sewer plant when we did the financing through USDA on that. So that portion is closed out there. The other thing, to give you some updates from the Planning Commission, I've been reporting the last couple of meetings about the different activities that are happening, and the Planning Commission has started to ramp up. They're looking at some ordinances and resolutions that they want to put before the Board of Commissioners to consider in the future. We're still in the draft phases of it, but it's all language that was contained in our comprehensive plan. And so when you do a comprehensive plan, you're not only supposed to talk about where you see the town going in over a 10-year period, but any zoning changes or changes you want to make to achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve as a community, hypothetically should at least be articulated in the comprehensive plan. You're not required to go forward with that because over a 10-year period, lots of things can change. And some of the items, if you recall from being in the comprehensive plan meeting, was to create some new zoning designations. And those were born out of the town's desire to do our part to maintain the rural character of the region in the area, especially as the town grows or has the ability to grow. We want to make sure that we are maintaining the rural character of the area also. So the Planning Commission, through the comprehensive plan, created some additional zoning districts. One was a rural estates zoning, which matches the county's NAR zoning. And anyone who is familiar with the county NAR zoning, when you're building a residential home, as a general rule of thumb, you have to have 10 acres for every home that you build. Our rural estates is essentially going to mirror that, and you will be required to have 10 acres for every home, or one home would have to have 10 acres for each home. So we're working on creating that now. The reason why it's not quite as simple is because when you really get into the weeds of the county's NAR zoning, at first glance you would look at that and say, wow, it just limits development in its entirety in the NAR area. It's all about rural preservation. But in reality, when you look at the county's table of permissible uses, there are many things that are permitted in the table of permissible uses that is just a general thought about the NAR you would not think were permitted. We're talking about hotels, movie theaters, restaurants. Those are all permitted in the county's NAR. Our planning commission needs to go through and see if we want to match that completely or if we want to gravitate a little bit more to the concept of rural preservation. So the planning commission's working on that. The other zoning change that they're looking to do is, or zoning district creation, is rural residential, which the county has already. And rural residential, as a general rule of thumb, requires 3 acres for every home that is being built. So when you look at our zoning, we will now be providing the full spectrum of the type of development to give developers the choice of, or at least not necessarily give them the choice, but create a nice mixture of densities and uses in our community. We'll have the R1 zoning district, which allows 2 houses per acre, the R2 zoning district that allows 4 houses per acre, and the R3 zoning district that, depending upon what you're looking to do, can be upwards of 8 units on an acre. And those are typically townhouses when you're talking about 8 units on an acre. So that's what the town currently has. We're now going to add the 1 house per 3 acres and the 1 house per 10 acres. So we're going to have a full spectrum of a good mixture in planning and developing the town going forward. Also in the comprehensive plan, there was a call to do some rezoning of existing land. Now, the Planning Commission cannot consider the rezoning of land when we're talking about changing some of the existing land to RR or rural estates until they create the language of what those things are going to be. So you would be given an ordinance to consider creating those 2 new zoning districts, and then somewhere in the future, you would be given a resolution to say that, okay, now those zoning areas have been created, the Planning Commission's recommending that the zoning that's on a particular piece of ground be changed. And if you look back at the history of the town of Rising Sun, and quite frankly, I know Commissioner Warnick and Commissioner Pearson are familiar with this, when you talk about spot zoning. And by law, you're not allowed to create spot zoning, which means somebody just says, hey, I don't like my zoning on my property, so in the middle of a particular zoning area, they petition to have their zoning changed. That does not create continuity of zoning, and it's not very good. So the town has changed a lot of zoning over the years, and it's created a jumbled zoning map if you prefer looking at it. Part of the work that the Planning Commission did starting in 2018 was, number one, they went through all the old resolutions and town meeting minutes to figure out who had gotten their zoning changed, because believe it or not, the zoning map that I inherited and you guys were all used to, Dave and Augie, on the board actually didn't reflect the zoning the way it actually existed. So this board, back in 2018, adopted a new zoning map that took into account what already legislatively had been changed. But there were still some areas that make no sense on the way they are zoned. And so the Planning Commission will be presenting some resolutions to you to clean up that zoning. Now, when you change the zoning on a land, you are required, and we will notify the property owner, and you're required to have a public hearing to allow the property owner or anybody else to come out and offer some comments on that. So we will be setting those up in addition in the future. The reasons for the zoning changes are the suggested changes. One are to create the continuity that we need. We also have some properties that are operating as this particular type of zoning. When I talk about operating, I'm not talking about the use as much as the setbacks and the density. And so, for instance, we have some properties that are R3 or R2, they're zoned for R1, they've already established the house that's there, they're surrounded by R2 property, so it makes no sense to keep them in that R1 zoning, or in some cases, we have some that are actually zoned R3. And the house is sitting on, quarter acre lots, and there's no way to do any kind of development or subdivide it. So to clean up the zoning map, that would be some of the changes. The other reason why they're doing it is zoning codes in municipal government sort of became popular in the late 60s and early 70s. And by that time, a lot of communities were already built, and they already established, the densities, so forth and so on. So a lot of times communities, if you're familiar with the term overlay and overlay zoning, I generally think that a lot of communities' original zoning was an overlay zoning, where they just did the best they could to match. And so a good example of that is when you look at all of our businesses in the downtown area along Main Street, they are actually non-conforming uses, because in the central commercial zoning district, they do not meet the setback requirements. They don't have the front yards, the side yards, the rear yards they're supposed to. Now, those buildings, as we know, have been around since the 1800s, the mid-1800s, many of them. And so at first glance, you would think, well, there's really no big deal. It is a big deal, because under the zoning laws, you can have a legal non-conforming use, but you can't do something to make it even more legally non-conforming. So if you have a building, for instance, that doesn't meet the setbacks, but they were declared as a legal non-conforming use, you can't put an addition on it with the idea, well, it's already legally non-conforming, what's the harm? The law is very clear. You can't add on to a legally non-conforming use. Another good example of that would be, let's say that in a zoning area, they had a height limitation of 20 feet on the building. And although the building that was built in the 1800s was 30 feet tall, you can't come in and add another 5 feet to it, because it's non-conforming when it got to 21 feet. Even though it existed at 30 feet, you can't make the legal non-conforming use even more legally non-conforming. So it makes sense to afford our businesses or properties located in those situations the ability to get out of that legal non-conforming use. Otherwise, they have to spend money and come in and get variances and special exceptions for things that the Planning Commission would routinely say, why are you even here? That's a no-brainer. But we have to drag them through the process because they're a legal non-conforming use. So that's another example of the changes that's being cleaned up, put forth by the Planning Commission. The other thing that's being done is there are, and I'll go back to when I first came to the town of Rising Sun, it was facing a tremendous amount of growth. Augie, I think you remember I had calculated like 780 properties, houses in the pipeline to be built, that if we had not gone into the sewer and water moratorium, for all intents and purposes, they probably would have been built. And as you guys know, what you inherited in the past was a failing wastewater treatment system that nobody was paying attention to, or wasn't, for a variety of reasons, wasn't being corrected. So you would have had a failing wastewater treatment plant that would have been exponentially much worse had the 780 houses been built. So the Planning Commission, in thinking about the way the community would look better, is proposing to rezone some large tracts of land that are currently allowing 8 houses per unit. There's some that are zoned R3, there's some that are zoned R2, there's some that are zoned R1. And so there's a couple different pieces of land that are looking to do RR, there's a couple that are looking to do rural estates, and there's a couple that are looking to do sort of a combination of a PUD, which on one hand would be, if you have a minimum amount of acreage that has to remain open, you could build a more dense development in a corner of the property as long as the total acreage that is left open would match the zoning. For instance, if you were gonna build one house per 10 acres, I don't want to get buried in the math, but if you had a requirement that you needed 10 houses per acre, you could potentially, and if you were limited to 10 houses on 100 acres, there's a scenario where you could build 20 houses in that same area, but by condensing them together in smaller lots and leaving the overall amount of land that's open to be relatively equal to what it would have been under the scenario of one house per 10 acres, if that makes sense. So there's all kinds of different ways to keep the land open and to allow people to develop and to also protect the town's interest. If you remember, one of the things the Planning Commission is really concerned about and was a driving force behind this work they started in 2018 was traffic. And if you remember in 2018, we commissioned a traffic study that, generally speaking, most residents didn't accept the traffic study from the engineering firm because all they know is they're sitting in the traffic here on Queen Street. They're sitting at the dual stop signs at Pearl and Queen Street. They're stuck in the traffic down past Walnut. They're stuck in the traffic at Walnut up by PNC Bank. And one of the things that we have been entertaining in the Planning Commission is that, you know, projecting traffic is not necessarily an exact science. There's a lot of formulas and concepts that you employ, but at the end of the day, nothing trumps reality. And reality is we have traffic issues around Town Hall here. So in order to help ensure that traffic does not become exasperated, there are methods in the zoning code and the comprehensive plan that allow the Planning Commission to make recommendations to you folks to make those necessary changes so we don't have a situation where 780 homes are being built and we're just left to deal with whatever the consequences of that are. So the Planning Commission's working really hard on that. They've had a lot of discussions about that over the last 2 meetings. The other follow-up I'll have with you is I've been talking about the different land development applications. The Planning Commission met with the representatives of Stevens Preserve last night, and they reviewed the scoping of their traffic study, which is basically a step in the process. The Planning Commission pretty much said that the plan as submitted is not consistent with their concerns of the amount of traffic that's going to be created. So they essentially told the developer, you need to go back to the drawing board and find other alternatives to get this traffic directed away from the town of Rising Sun. And the reason why this is critical, when I talked about what goes into a traffic study, there's sort of like a general rule of thumb that the width of the road will attract people to the road. So let's consider Route 1, for instance. A lot of people look at Route 1, there's really no traffic lights. You can get on it, you can do 45, 50 miles an hour, you know, down through there. You can make time to get where you're going. But in our reality, we don't really have any employment centers here in the town of Rising Sun that are employing 200-300 people other than the Martin Shopping Center. So when you think about some of these developments, we need to be aware of the fact that the employment centers are not in the town of Rising Sun. And so you have people that are either, depending upon where the development is at, jumping right out on one of these major roads, going down 274, going out 273 if they're on the other end. But if the development is located in particular areas, in order for people to get to their employment in Baltimore and Aberdeen and Annapolis, or, you know, in that manner, they routinely are going to take 95. And in order to get to 95, they need to come through the town of Rising Sun to do that. Yes, you can get on Route 1 and take a more scenic route to get down south, but not everybody does that. A sizable number of people would rather roll the dice and take a chance that they're going to be able to get through 95 without any congestion, but they also do that because they're dropping Johnny off at the elementary school, the middle school. They're going to the high school. They're going to Rise and Grind to get coffee. They're going to Starbucks, McDonald's. They're going to Martin's, whatever. The services they need are in the town. And so the Planning Commission is really taking serious, looking past just the generic traffic study that says because Route 1 is wider, people are going to go Route 1. We know being here that that's not what happens. We see it in our intersections in the evening, in the morning. So that's where the Planning Commission is on that. The last thing I wanted to, in addition to that, another ordinance that they're going to be considering and putting before you is what is called a continuity of streets and developments. And what that means is it doesn't make sense, especially for larger developments, to be on what I consider an island by themselves. One way in, one way out. One, that creates a lot of problems for emergency services. Tree goes across the road, an accident happens, a flood happens, whatever, and emergency services only have one way to get into the development. So in modern day land development principles, lots of communities have what is called a continuity of streets and a continuity of developments, which essentially you see it in your development down in Maple Heights, that dead-end street there. Now that really wasn't designed to be an effective continuity because it's not wide enough, but we would create an ordinance that would call for these developments when they're built to have more than one way to get traffic in and out, and to plan for potential development that could happen in the future with alternative ways to get traffic out. So that can help with your traffic congestion because you're not building developments that have one way out and they're going to take the path of least resistance and head in a direction that creates bottle jams. By having continuity of development and continuity of streets, people have other ways to get out and do their business. And so you scatter 10,000 vehicles or whatever, 5,000 vehicles in multiple directions instead of just one direction or limited direction. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention, and I've sort of told you guys individually this in the past, mold is really becoming an issue in this community. In about another 2 weeks, I'm going to be involved in probably 2 additional court cases above and beyond the ones I have already. We have residents that are renting properties and the landlords are refusing to take care of leaks, and now we're getting mold. And I've talked to you folks, we're talking about mold that when you look at the corner of a room, the mold starts at the floor, and Augie, you can remember this from fire investigations, a V pattern right up the wall on it because the mold starts at the top, and then that's how it's filtering down as the moisture comes down. We have a lot of problems where it's just really scary how bad the mold is. We have landlords that are coming in and trying to make the repairs themselves. There's a belief that you just put Clorox bleach on mold. That's not the method for treatment. And so we're going to need to consider what our role is going to be in that matter. Because right now, the health department has no jurisdiction in that. And a lot of our residents, and at the end of the day, there are residents, they pay their rent, but they shop in our community. They have the right to vote in our community. They are being subjected to landlords that even when they put their rent in escrow to contest that their living condition is bad, the landlords are taking them to court through the eviction process. And I'm literally involved with a case where one part of the court is dealing with the eviction and the other part of the court is dealing with the rent being in escrow. And there's no communication between the two of them. And I know I'm speaking for the board, we would all be uncomfortable just the party line of it's not our issue. I mean, they are our residents and they're living in deplorable situations. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. It is escalating, and we're dealing with it. That's all I have.
Thank you, Town Administrator. Judy?
Well, I'm gonna highlight some things and move on, but, I do want to say a special thank you to our Public Works team. If you've worked with them as closely as I do every day, you realize what a super team of people we have. Their skill sets are so complementary that they're problem solving from the time they come to work until they go home. And if there's something that they think that helps the town or helps the residents, they're always there. So I just wanted to do a special thank you to them for all that they've done for us in the last few months. In looking at our financials, you'll see a few little handwritten notes that I was going through because I really wanted to talk about the fact that with real estate tax and debt service, we're collecting really well. This year I'm recording it as we collect it, so when you see that we have, based against the budget, we've got about 60% of our real estate tax collected and also another 53% of our debt service collected. That's real monies that we've collected already. We're operating in the general fund with a positive balance of $233,000 through the end of November. If you look at the water fund, we're very positive there as well. We are billing out about 5 million gallons a month, give or take. And if you look at our monthly, we're averaging about $75,000 a month with a positive operation of $136,000. Sewer, we have accounted for the grant that came in, and that's part of our financial position with that. We're positive $45,000 in sewer operations. So all the funds are performing really well. If you look at our accounts receivable, we're still running about a 92% between current and 30 day. So where our delinquency is very well managed. We're still focused on trying to get the town to where we're about 75% electronic as we move forward. We're up to about 52% now with billing and collections. And right now I don't see anything that I would consider a concern at all. We have a new person who started with us who's has a very strong background in accounting. So she's going to be a really great asset to us in a few months after she's been here long enough to understand all of our workflows. So everything else is good.
Thank you, Judy. Chief?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. I don't have much of a report. However, I did want to make it known to the community that we are hiring for officers. We do have a great benefits package. We do have a take-home car, competitive salaries. So we do need people that are interested in becoming police officers to come on in, get an application, and let's talk about it. So that's all I have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. All right, the mayor's report is going to be pretty brief this evening. I want to thank our entire staff for a few things. First and foremost, the Northeast Parade. Myself, the board and staff and chief were there. It was a great time. We definitely enjoyed ourselves. A huge thank you to Judy, to our Public Works team. I definitely want to recognize Chris George, who did an amazing job with that float. It looked fantastic. If you didn't see us out there, we brought our own snow with us, which everyone thought was pretty cool. So the snow was falling while we were going through the parade route. I also want to thank our entire staff and police department for a great job with Winter Extravaganza. We again had a beautiful event. I had so many people come up to me and say it was like a Hallmark movie with the snowfall, with ice skating on Main Street, with our carriage rides, and then just the sense of community with people coming out just to enjoy the ambience. We lit our brand new tree this year, which was the newest addition we had. It just was wonderful. So I want to thank our entire board and staff for such a great event. Tomorrow I'm meeting with the new Rising Sun High School principal. He recently took Chip Helm's place, and Chip Helm moved to Booth Street. I have a special presentation for Chip Helm that I'll be asking the board to do in January. I also wanted to add that the town, you may have seen, was awarded the Outstanding Rural Community Development Award by the Maryland Rural Council. Not long ago, 50% of our downtown was vacant for a long period of time, almost a decade. The town's property values had declined, and we weren't sure where we were headed. By work of this board, by work of our staff, we've definitely seen a rebirth. The town's real estate tax base has increased 8.2%, and as you can see, our Main Street has come back to life with new businesses joining. We're hopeful that in the next year or so that we will see more businesses join our Main Street. I would certainly be remiss if I didn't recognize Town Administrator Calvin Bonenberger, Judy Melton, and our entire staff. I also want to say thank you to this board because it is by the decisions that we have made as a group that have changed Rising Sun, I believe, for the better. So congratulations to all of you. I also want to say a thank you to Cecil County Executive Daniel Hornberger, Delegate Kevin Hornberger, and Senator Jason Gallion, who all put in for the nomination and had letters in the packet. So it was great to be recognized by them. That concludes the mayor's report. Moving forward into commissioner comments. Commissioner Braun.
I have no report.
Commissioner Pearson.
I have a couple of things. It's Christmas time. Please remember to water your live trees. You cannot afford to let them dry out. They become like kindling then. It's just time to practice safety at this time of the year. This is the worst time for firefighters because it increases exponentially the amount of calls you get of serious nature. The other thing, recently on social media, there's been a lot of questions about the areas that our police department covers. And I want to clarify something. We have reciprocal agreements with all of the other towns and the state and county. A lot of times, because of manpower shortages in the county and the state, we have officers that are the closest to a serious incident. Therefore, we respond, and if you see them responding in an area that's not Rising Sun, understand that we're just fulfilling our end of the agreement as they would if we needed help. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Pearson. Commissioner Warnick.
Actually, one thing we have, and anybody that's been to Veterans Park here lately has noticed some fresh pavement, and I'd like to thank our Public Works guys for the work down there working on some drainage issues, and the town administrator for making sure we get that parking lot repaved, and also the stone area that along I should say not stone really, but rather millings, the asphalt millings along the one edge of the park is now paved rather than asphalt millings, so it'll hold up a little better to rainwater and plowing and things like that. On rainy days, it won't be tracking millings into your car and things like that. So, I know I was excited to get some of those things done as part of some of our paving initiatives. We were starting to really notice the parking lot really breaking up, and so we're also working on some of the sidewalk is low lying going into the park. And so we had put some stone across there temporarily to deal with the fact that it was always getting kind of covered in mold or whatever, and really, or mildew rather, and really slick, or algae, I guess, really, and getting really slick. So we put that across there, but we're in the process of fixing some of the drainage down there and replacing some of that sidewalk, and then I believe there's some crosswalks coming. So we've got a lot of things going on at Veterans Park right now to improve the parking situation as well, and that also helps out with things like Little League. Yep. So it's certainly a welcome improvement to the area. So with that, I think that's pretty much my report.
Thank you, Commissioner Warnick. All right, you can see on the agenda the upcoming holidays that we have in our trash, recycling, and yard waste schedule. We look forward to seeing you all in the new year. Could I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.